Hello to everyone tuning in. Before I tell you my story, let me make something painfully clear. This isn't a bedtime tale. There are no knights, no miracles, no happy endings. This is not about how love conquered all. This is the story of a woman who was erased long before death touched her body. A woman who stitched her silence into layers. Layers I wore every day like armor, hiding a horror that society dismissed as women being emotional. I'm not here to whisper or weep. I'm not some trembling old widow haunted by shadows. I am Eleanor Mendez, and I survived what no one should have to survive. 45 years inside a prison with lace curtains. They called him the Mercy of Ashgrove. Dr. Julian Cross, a miracle worker, a saint in a white coat. My husband, Thomas, a man I trusted with my life, worshipped him like a god. But in that sterile hospital room, they didn't heal me. They drugged me, branded me, used me. I was made into a vessel for a child that wasn't mine, a child I never chose to carry. And Thomas, the man who should have protected me, turned away, chose his comfort over my life. He said I was hysterical, and so they buried the truth with lithium and smiling nurses. But I remember every injection, every silent scream. Today I speak because no one spoke for me, because Julian Cross wasn't a healer. He was a butcher in disguise. And Thomas? He was no husband. He was a coward who sold me to the system and smiled while it devoured me. This is the story of a perfect town built on women's corpses, a system that weaponized silence and called it civility. But I'm still here, and my voice is no longer a whisper. I am Eleanor Mendez. I have nothing left to lose. So listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you might just be buried under your own town's foundation. Tell me where you're listening from. Leave a comment. Subscribe, so we can uncover the stories that were never meant to be heard. My name is Eleanor Mendez, and I died for the first time on October 12, 1979. I was 23 years old. The town of Ashgrove smelled like fallen leaves and gasoline that fall. The wind had a kind of dry cruelty to it, the kind that cracks your lips and makes you bleed without noticing. We had just moved into the blue house on Candlewick Road, me and Thomas. It was our first real home, a gift from his father after our shotgun wedding. I thought it was charming, even with the creaky floorboards and the peeling paint. I had spent hours trying to make it feel like something warm, something alive. I crocheted throw blankets, lit candles, baked too many pies. I was desperate to be what I was told a good wife should be. That night, I wore my best nightgown. It was soft, cream-colored cotton with little blue flowers at the collar. I remember because it was the last time I would ever wear it. We had just come back from dinner at Thomas's boss's house. The invitation had been sudden. The man, Dr. Julian Cross, was new in town. He was the head physician at the Ashgrove Medical Center and was quickly becoming a local celebrity. Everyone said he was brilliant, a miracle worker, a gentle soul. I didn't like him the moment I met him. There was something in his eyes. The way he looked at people, not at them, but through them, like they were already broken, and he was imagining how he'd put the pieces back together, like God with a scalpel. He was polite, sure, maybe too polite. His smile was too measured, his hands too still. He complimented my baking, without ever tasting it. But Thomas adored him. I could see it. The way he leaned in when Julian spoke. The laughter, too loud, too eager. Thomas had always wanted to be somebody. I just didn't realize how badly. When we got home, Thomas was quiet. Oddly quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed, removed his tie slowly and said, "Dr. Cross thinks you should come in for a consultation." I blinked. For what? He says you look frail, thin, that maybe you've got nerves or something. Frail. I had lost a little weight, sure. I was anxious. New marriage. New town. New everything. But I was functioning. Smiling. Cooking. Cleaning. "Thomas," I said, "I'm fine." He didn't answer me. Just stood up, walked to the bathroom, and shut the door. I heard the faucet run. And then I heard him cry. That was the first time I realized something was deeply wrong. But it wasn't with me. It was with him. With the town. With what was coming. The next day, I was escorted to the Ashgrove Medical Center. Not asked. Escorted. By two nurses. One had a clipboard. The other had pity in her eyes. Julian Cross was waiting for me in a room that smelled like mint and bleach. He wore a dark gray suit and no lab coat. "Eleanor," he said with a smile. "You're safe here." My heart began to race. I didn't remember giving consent to anything. I didn't remember agreeing to any kind of assessment. I didn't remember signing a form. But apparently my husband had. According to the state of Illinois, in 1979, a husband's word was enough. They said I was exhausted, delicate, emotionally compromised, that I needed rest, a break. The first injection came that night. The nurse said it would help me sleep. But I didn't sleep. I drifted into blackness. Hours melted. Time warped. I remember fluorescent lights. Waking up strapped to a gurney. Someone brushing my hair. Someone whispering something about a child. A special child. And then I saw Julian's face above me. He wasn't smiling anymore. When I came to again, it was weeks later. I was still in the facility. Still under care. And I was pregnant. 6 weeks, they told me. A miracle, they called it. My chart said voluntary IVF procedure. I had no memory of agreeing to it. I had no memory of anything at all. When Thomas visited me just once, he looked tired, but also relieved. "You're doing great, honey," he said. And I realized then. He knew. He had let them do this to me. He had let them. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Literally, my vocal cords were damaged. I would later learn from one of the nurses, whispered behind closed doors, that I'd had a bad reaction to the sedatives. That's what they said. A reaction. But I knew what it really was. Silence wasn't a symptom. It was the plan. The walls of the Ashgrove Medical Center were soft yellow, but I remember them as gray, lifeless, as if the light refused to touch them. I walked like a phantom down sterile corridors. Eyes followed me, nurses, orderlies, even patients in their gowns with too wide eyes. No one ever said anything. I was the woman who screamed too much. The woman who had been helped. Now I was the woman carrying the miracle. I wasn't allowed to see my medical records. I asked. I begged in writing, since my voice was still damaged. They said everything was handled by my husband. That phrase kept haunting me. Your husband signed the forms. Your husband approved the treatment. Your husband said you were unstable. I was 23. I had no power. My womb did not belong to me. The worst part? A tiny part of me hoped the child wasn't real. That this was all a psychotic break, some twisted nightmare. I prayed to wake up bleeding. But the child was real. My body was changing fast. Too fast. I was showing after barely 6 weeks. And then came the dreams. I'd wake up in a sweat, my hospital gown soaked, my hands gripping the thin mattress. The dream was always the same. I was in a room with no doors. White walls. Bright lights. My legs strapped down. A voice telling me to be calm. And then the pressure. A syringe. Coldness in my veins. Then laughter. Always laughter. Dr. Cross began visiting me more frequently. He would sit across from me with his perfect posture, like a priest at confession. He asked me how I felt. Told me I was brave. That not every woman gets to be part of something greater. "This child," he said, "is a gift, Eleanor. A prototype. We chose you. We chose you." Like I was a file on a desk. A checked box. "You'll be proud one day." I wanted to claw his eyes out. But I nodded. Because anger was dangerous in that place. Because women who scream get sedated. 3 months in, Thomas came to visit again. He brought me a sweater I'd knitted the year before. He looked uncomfortable. Like a teenager visiting an elderly relative. "You look good," he lied. I couldn't speak, so I just stared. Stared at his hands. His shoes. Not at his eyes. I couldn't. If I looked too long, I might remember I loved him once. I passed him a piece of paper. "Why did you let them do this to me?" He read it. Blinked. Looked away. Said nothing. I passed him another note. "Whose child is this?" He shook his head. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, Ellie." And he left. After that, something in me cracked. Not like a shatter. Like a quiet fracture. A hairline split down the middle of my soul. I began keeping a secret notebook. I hid it in a tear under the mattress seam. Pages and pages of what I remembered. What I dreamed. What they gave me. What I overheard. And one night, while I was supposed to be asleep, I heard them talking. Cross. A nurse named Valerie. And a man I didn't recognize. They stood just outside the hallway, unaware I was awake. "The embryo stabilized," Cross said. "She's responding better than the previous trials." "What about the voice loss?" the other man asked. "Collateral. The husband's already signed long-term consent. He won't back out. Not with what we gave him." I remember clutching my belly so tightly I thought I'd crush it. Not from love. From terror. I wasn't carrying a baby. I was carrying an experiment. The next morning, Valerie entered my room with a soft smile and a clipboard. "Congratulations," she said. "You're being moved to a more comfortable wing." But her eyes wouldn't meet mine. That was the moment I knew. They were going to keep me pregnant. And then they were going to erase me. They moved me in the middle of the night. No warning. No questions. No rights. A nurse woke me at 3:17 a.m. She smiled like this was normal. "Let's get you somewhere quieter," she whispered. I wanted to scream, but my voice was still just a dry rasp, a ghost of what it used to be. I was wheeled down long, cold corridors under dim fluorescent lights. The cart squeaked with every bump. I counted the turns. 3 lefts. 2 rights. A ramp. Ward 6C. That's where they took the women they didn't want anyone to see. My new room had no windows. The walls were padded. Not fully, but just enough to remind you they were thinking about your safety. The bed had restraints. The mirror was metal. And the cameras never blinked. The only color in the room was the dull orange of a plastic chair bolted to the floor. That first morning, a nurse brought me a tray of food and a new set of pills. When I refused, she simply said, "Noncompliance will be interpreted as a psychotic episode. You don't want that, Eleanor." So I swallowed the pills. And I wrote everything down later in my secret notebook. I tore out a piece of the lining from my pillow and stitched the notebook inside with thread from my hospital gown. If they were going to erase me, they wouldn't erase everything. Weeks passed. Maybe months. I stopped counting. I existed in a limbo of sedatives, injections, forced smiles, and blood pressure checks. They kept scanning me, monitoring, measuring the growth of the fetus. But no one ever referred to it as my child. They called it the specimen. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear screams echo through the vents. Women begging. Women praying. Women laughing in a way that didn't sound human. Other times, there was silence. And silence, I learned, was far more terrifying. One afternoon, a new nurse came in. Her name tag said Mira. She was younger than the others. Nervous. She looked over her shoulder before whispering to me, "You shouldn't be here." I blinked. For weeks, no one had looked me in the eye like that. "You're not sick," she said. "You're documented. You're one of the flagged patients, the ones they track." She slid a folded napkin under my tray. I opened it later. Inside, written in shaky pen, "They're monitoring what the baby does to your brain." My hands shook when I read it. Not from fear, from confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I had never been crazy. I was being used. They weren't just studying the child. They were studying me, my behavior, my dreams, my thoughts, my silence. I was a lab rat in a human disguise. That night, Mira came back. "There were others before you," she whispered. "At least 6. Maybe more. Some were transferred. Some just disappeared." Transferred where? "I'm out." She didn't answer. But her eyes said enough. Then she pressed something into my palm. A photograph. It was faded and torn. A woman in a hospital gown, her eyes empty, her belly huge. On the back, patient number 5, hysteria compliant. Fetus, terminated at 28 weeks. I wanted to vomit, but I knew I couldn't. That would draw attention. They were always watching. Instead, I buried the photo in my pillow lining, next to my notebook. I wrote until my fingers cramped. Patient number 5 equals failed. I am patient number 7. Transfer equals cover for execution. Termination equals what they planned for me. The walls felt like they were closing in. In the following days, I started to feel changes. I could hear things I shouldn't. Conversations down the hallway, behind closed doors. Machines humming 3 floors away. I felt the lights before they flickered. I dreamt of people I'd never met, and then saw them in the hallways the next day. The fetus wasn't just growing. It was awakening something inside me. Something unnatural. And they knew it. One day, Dr. Cross entered the room without knocking. He brought 2 men in suits. Not doctors. Not nurses. One had a briefcase. The other had a tranquilizer. "Eleanor," Julian said, voice calm. "You're progressing beautifully. But we need to escalate observation. We'll be moving you again." "No," I mouthed. "Please." "No." He tilted his head like I was a stray dog. "You should be proud," he said. "You've made it further than any of the others. This child will change the world." And then he nodded to the man with the needle. I lunged. I don't know how. I don't even remember standing. But I was across the room in seconds. I bit him. Scratched. Tore at his skin like an animal. The needle clattered to the floor. And I screamed. I screamed. My voice came back in that moment, Raw, broken, monstrous, but it was mine. You're not God. They tackled me. I was injected, bound, and strapped to the gurney. But as the world blurred around me, I smiled. Because I had remembered something powerful. I am not a vessel. I am not an experiment. I am a mother. And I will burn this place to the ground. They called it an incident. That's what they always do in places like this. When a woman fights back, it's never called survival. It's never called resistance. It's an incident. I woke up restrained. Wrist straps. Ankle cuffs. A neck brace so tight I could barely move my head. My throat was raw from screaming, and I could still feel the heat of their hands pinning me down, their knees digging into my ribcage. A nurse with a clipboard stood beside my bed. Not Mira. I didn't see her again after that night. Patient 278. The nurse read. Violent outburst. Delusional episode. Recommendation. Sedation plus isolation. Indefinite duration. No doctor. No judge. No defense. Just paperwork in silence. They moved me to observation cell B, which sounded like a place in a zoo. It was barely 3 meters wide, windowless, with a drainage grate in the center of the floor and fluorescent lighting that never turned off. There was no bed. No chair. Just the grate and the 4 padded walls. For meals, they slid a tray through a slot. No utensils. Just soft food in plastic lumps. No privacy. Not even for bathroom needs. I had become an animal in their eyes. A breeding animal. A womb with a history of instability. The worst part wasn't the restraints or the lights. It was the silence. No one spoke to me. For days. Maybe longer. I lost track. There were no check-ins. No therapy. No explanations. Just pills. So many pills. I hid them behind my gums. Swallowed only what I had to. I scratched the days into my skin with my fingernails when I ran out of anything else. I had no way of knowing if it was working, if I was staying sane, but at least I was still thinking. They couldn't take that from me. Not yet. One day, a voice spoke through the wall. Not from inside the room. From the other side of the grate. You fought back. It was a woman. Her voice was hoarse. Dry. Old maybe, or just broken. How long they had you? I didn't answer at first. I didn't trust her. But the silence had eaten away so much of me. I couldn't help it. For months, I whispered. She coughed. Laughed bitterly. You're still new. Don't worry. You'll learn to fold your pain just right so they don't notice it anymore. What did they do to you? I asked. Long pause. Made me carry. Twice. First time, the baby never made it past 7 months. Second time, they took her before she opened her eyes. Said it was a medical necessity. My stomach twisted. I sat in the corner, arms wrapped around my swollen belly, and for the first time I realized. They don't want the baby. They want the process. The data. The body's responses. The compliance curve. The breakdown. The surrender. The woman's name was June. At least that's what she told me. She said they kept her under observation for nearly a year before transferring her to a private wing for long-term monitoring. She hadn't seen sunlight in over 400 days. They'll come for you soon, she said one night. To prep. Prep for what? Termination. Or birth. They don't always tell you which. That night I cried. Not because I was afraid to die. I had been dying slowly since the day they sedated me. No, I cried because I didn't know if I'd be allowed to hold my baby. If they'd let me see its face. If it was even mine. Or if they'd sedate me during labor and take it while I slept. A quiet clinical abduction. The next day they moved me again. This time to procedure room 7. Sterile. Metal. Brutal. A man with a shaved head and thick glasses came in with a tray of instruments. We're just taking some samples, he said calmly. You won't feel much. He inserted a long needle into my abdomen, no anesthesia. I screamed through clenched teeth as he withdrew fluid into a small vial. I saw the label as he sealed it. Specimen 7F/tissue viability. Scan/GenCycle Labs. Confidential. GenCycle. I'd heard that name before. In whispers around the hospital. Not part of the public hospital network. Private. Experimental. Military adjacent. My pregnancy had been outsourced. Back in my room I broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Methodically. I pressed my head to the wall and whispered. I don't think I'll make it. She replied, her voice barely a breath. Then make sure you're remembered. I was 68 when I found the file. I had spent most of my life trying to forget what happened in Ashgrove. And yet, All it took was one dusty cardboard box to bring it all back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Back to when I was still in the hospital, locked in that room like a dangerous animal. Pregnant. Alone. Trapped in a system built to crush women like me. After the extraction procedure, they kept me under observation for another 72 hours. Blood work. Vaginal scans. Psychological evaluations where no one asked real questions. They just stared at clipboards and watched how I breathed. They were preparing for something. And I knew deep in my bones, they didn't expect me to leave that place alive. One morning, when the nurse came in to take my vitals, she forgot to lock the medication cabinet. It was stupid. Careless. Maybe they thought I was too far gone to notice. But I noticed. Because I was no longer trying to survive. I was trying to gather proof. Later that night, when the halls were quiet, I forced myself out of bed. I was 6 months pregnant. Every movement hurt. But I moved like a ghost, silent and angry. I limped over to the unlocked cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, 3 vials labeled Neurocline, Batch 3C. A folder marked private/internal use only/patient cohort 07. And something I still have to this day. A black flash drive. I didn't even know what a flash drive was back then. But I knew how to hide things. I slipped it into the lining of my mattress and took the file under my hospital gown. Back in my room, I read it under the blanket with a flashlight stolen from a supply closet days earlier. Inside that folder were names. 27 women. Each with dates, conditions, treatment notes. Some marked terminated. Some marked unstable. Only 2 said, still viable. And I was one of them. But what struck me most wasn't my name. It was another. June Halvorsen. Patient number 003. Diagnosed. Chronic delusional paranoia, probable infertility. Note. Unexpectedly conceived after synthetic hormone trial. Unaware of timing. Monitoring suggests cognitive resistance developing. Recommend sedation. I stared at the page until the words blurred. June. I whispered. You weren't crazy. You were right. She had disappeared from the walls days earlier. No more voice through the vent. No more whispered truths. I still don't know what happened to her. But I think I can guess. Sometimes now, at 73, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that file. If I had simply obeyed. Swallowed every pill. Delivered quietly, like they wanted me to. Would they have let me live? Would my child have been whisked away, rebranded, renamed, reprogrammed? Sometimes I wake up at 4 a.m., hand on my stomach, forgetting that belly hasn't been there in 5 decades. The trauma sits under my skin like bone. Anyway, I made a decision that night. I couldn't fight them physically. I couldn't trust anyone. But I could run. And I could take something with me. I began faking compliance. Taking pills, smiling at nurses, talking to imaginary therapists about feeling hopeful. I let them believe I was folding. It worked. Within a week, they moved me out of the isolation ward and back into the general monitoring unit. That's when I met Angela. Angela was young, maybe 18, fresh face, clean uniform. She brought my meals and fluffed my pillows and whispered too much. I watched her for 2 days and then took a risk. How long have you been working here? I asked. She smiled. 3 weeks. Why? Because I need to get out, I whispered. And if you help me, I'll give you evidence. Real evidence. Enough to burn this place down. She went pale. I saw the terror flash across her face. And then unexpectedly she nodded. They're not who they say they are, she said. I know. I just didn't know how to prove it. Angela became my lifeline. She smuggled me extra food. Copied schedules. Marked which nights had fewer guards on rotation. She even brought me a disposable phone and showed me how to hide it in the tampon bin. We planned for 3 days. And then on the 4th, the world caught fire. Angela was my unexpected hope, a fragile thread in a tangled web of lies. She didn't ask too many questions. She just nodded when I told her about the file, about GenCycle, about the women who had vanished without a trace. Every day, she slipped me scraps of food, careful to avoid the guards' eyes. Every night, she brought news, whispered warnings about when patrols would change, which doors would be left unlocked for just a moment. You need to get out before the baby comes, she said. They won't let you leave once you start showing. I nodded, even though my swollen belly made it hard to move fast. I spent hours memorizing the hospital's layout, the security cameras, the guard shifts, the blind spots in the hallways. I learned which elevators were slow and which stairwells led outside, One night, after lights out, Angela came to my room with a small bundle wrapped in a hospital gown. "Here," she said. "You'll need this." Inside was a worn coat, a pair of boots, and a little plastic vial, one of those neurochemical drugs. "For when it gets hard," she whispered. Her eyes were full of fear. I was full of rage. I waited for the right moment, the longest shift change, when 2 guards got distracted by a phone call. I slipped out of my room, heart pounding, every breath shallow and desperate. I moved like a shadow, crawling through hallways, hiding behind carts, ducking under security cameras. Angela had marked the path with tiny scratches on the walls. A secret map only I could read. When I finally reached the emergency exit, the door was locked. Of course, but the lock was old and rusty. I fumbled with a bobby pin Angela had given me, and after what felt like an eternity, it clicked open. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I dragged my aching body away from the building, towards the dark forest beyond the hospital grounds. I didn't look back, but I wasn't free yet. I had no ID, no money, no phone except the hidden one Angela gave me, which barely worked. The baby was growing inside me, each kick a painful reminder of what I was running from, and what I might lose. I found refuge in a tiny roadside motel, a place where no one asked questions. I hid in the bathroom, covered my belly with a loose jacket, and tried to plan the next move. Every night, I heard sirens in the distance. Every morning, I woke trembling, wondering if they had found me. I knew one thing for sure. If I was caught, they'd take the baby. And I couldn't let that happen. Years later, as I tell you this story, I still carry those scars. Not just on my body, but on my soul. But surviving wasn't enough. I had to make sure no woman would suffer like I did. Freedom tasted bitter and fragile. After escaping Ashgrove Hospital, I had nowhere to go. I moved from town to town, hiding my swollen belly beneath layers of clothing, afraid to trust anyone. I found work cleaning houses and doing laundry, jobs where no one asked questions, no one looked too close. Richard never came looking for me. Not once. I don't know if it was cowardice or complicity, or maybe he was scared of what the truth would do to his perfect little life. The doctors, the nurses, the entire system, they all worked to erase women like me. But the baby, my child, that was different. I named her Clara. She was born in a cramped apartment, far from the sterile hospital walls that had tried to claim her. Raising Clara alone was the hardest fight of my life. Every day, I wrestled with fear. Fear that the past would catch up, that they would take her from me. But Clara was my light. Her laughter was the only thing that kept me tethered to hope. I never told her the full story. How could I? How do you explain to a child that the man she calls grandfather was silent when she was conceived in cruelty? Sometimes, when Clara was asleep, I would sit by the window and stare at the stars. I asked myself why I survived when so many didn't. Why Richard chose silence. And most of all, why I had to carry this burden alone. Now at 73, I am ready to tell you everything. Because silence is a prison. And my voice is the key. Freedom tasted bitter and fragile. After escaping Ashgrove Hospital, I had nowhere to go. I moved from town to town, sleeping on floors in cheap motels, anywhere I could stay hidden. I wrapped myself in layers of clothing, hiding the growing weight of my secret beneath loose coats and scarves. Every glance felt like a threat. Every stranger's smile a possible trap. Richard never came looking for me. Not once. I don't know if it was cowardice or complicity. Or maybe he was scared of what the truth would do to his perfect little life. He was that kind of man. The kind who values comfort over courage, silence over confrontation. The doctors, the nurses, the entire system, they all worked together to erase women like me. Women who knew too much. Women who carried evidence in their bodies. But my child, my baby, that was different. She was life itself, growing stronger inside me despite everything. I named her Clara. Clara was born in a cramped apartment, far from the sterile walls of Ashgrove. No doctors in white coats. No monitors beeping coldly beside her tiny cradle. Just me trembling and exhausted, holding this fragile new world in my arms. Raising Clara alone was the hardest fight of my life. Every day was a battle against fear. Fear that the past would catch up. Fear that someone, Richard, the hospital, the city, would come and take her away. But Clara was my light. Her laughter was the only thing that kept me tethered to hope. Her tiny hands and bright eyes reminded me why I survived. Why I refused to break. I never told her the full story. How could I? How do you explain to a child that the man she calls grandfather was silent while she was conceived in cruelty? How do you explain betrayal when all she knows is love? Sometimes, when Clara was asleep, I would sit by the window and stare at the stars. I asked myself why I survived when so many others didn't. Why Richard chose silence when he could have fought. And most of all, why I had to carry this burden alone. There were nights I wanted to scream. Nights when the memories clawed at my mind like wild beasts. I would lie awake, heart pounding, reliving every moment of that hospital room. The cold hands of strangers. The endless pills. The whispered threats. But I kept going. Because Clara needed me. Because I needed to believe that one day, someone would hear my story. That one day, the truth would set me free. Now, at 73, I am ready to tell you everything. Because silence is a prison. And my voice is the key. I am not just a survivor. I am a warrior. A woman who spent 45 years in a living hell. And I will not let those years be forgotten. This is my story. And it is far from over. Years passed, but the shadows of Ashgrove never left me. Clara grew into a bright, kind woman, unaware of the nightmare I escaped. I watched her from afar, proud but terrified. How could I protect her from a world that had already tried to steal her? I kept my distance from Richard, but the town never forgot. Whispers followed him like a dark cloud. Angel of Ashgrove, they called him. A saint to some. A coward and a liar to me. The city built monuments to forget its sins. But I kept my truth alive. One day, a letter arrived. No return address. No signature. Inside, a single photo, a younger woman, eyes filled with pain. A note. Find me before it's too late. I knew immediately. It was June. The woman from the file. She was alive. My heart raced. After all these years, a piece of the past reached out to me. Was this a chance to finally break the silence? Or a trap meant to pull me back into hell? I made a choice. I would find June. For Clara. For every woman silenced. For myself. Finding June was like chasing a ghost through a city that didn't want to remember. The photo was old, faded, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. I tracked her through old hospital records, whispers, and a few brave souls who still remembered. She was living on the outskirts, working as a seamstress in a small shop. When I finally saw her, she looked nothing like the woman in the photo. Time and sorrow had softened her sharp edges. June didn't want to talk at first. She was scared, guarded, unsure if my visit was a blessing or a curse. But slowly, over cups of bitter tea and long silences, we began to share our stories. Her tale was a mirror of mine, trapped, betrayed, silenced. But unlike me, she never escaped Ashgrove. She carried scars deeper than I could see. I lost my baby, she whispered one evening. They took her away. Her voice cracked with pain I knew too well. I reached across the table and took her trembling hands. We survived, I told her. And we will fight. Together, we made a promise. To expose the lies. To protect the forgotten. To break the silence forever. Finding June was the beginning of something I never dared hope for. A chance to fight back. We met in a small, dimly lit room in her apartment, surrounded by sewing machines and piles of fabric. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. June was quiet at first, her hands twitching nervously as she traced the seams of an unfinished dress. I've kept this hidden for so long, she said, voice trembling. She pulled out a worn folder filled with documents, letters, medical records, photos, evidence, proof. Reading through the papers, I felt a mix of rage and sorrow. Names of women who had vanished. Reports altered or destroyed. Doctors who denied everything. But the worst part was the silence. The conspiracy of quiet that had swallowed so many cries for help. We have to bring this to light, I told June. Her eyes flickered with hope. We began to gather more stories. From other women, from families, from those brave enough to speak. It wasn't easy. Many were afraid. Some disappeared. But slowly a network formed. A patchwork of voices rising from the shadows. Richard's name came up more than once. Not just as a silent witness, but as someone who actively covered up the horrors. One night, I sat alone, holding a faded photograph of Clara as a child. I thought about the years stolen from us. The pain we endured in silence. But I also thought about the future. A future where no woman would be forced to carry a child in silence, where no husband would betray. We prepared our evidence carefully. Legal counsel was tentative but willing. The media smelled a story. And then came the threats. Calls in the middle of the night. A broken window. But I refused to back down. For Clara. For June. For every woman who had been silenced. This fight was mine now. And I was ready. Finding June was only the start. What came next was a maze of secrets, threats, and a darkness deeper than either of us imagined. As we pored over the documents, June revealed something chilling. There was a hidden ledger, a list not just of names, but of payments. Bribes, hush money, linking hospital officials, local politicians, even Richard. I felt bile rise in my throat. Richard, the man who shared my bed for decades, was part of a web that swallowed women whole. Then came the anonymous warnings. A note slipped under my door. Stop digging or else. Our phones rang at midnight. Silent calls. Heavy breathing. One evening, June didn't come to our meeting. I found her apartment door ajar. Inside, drawers were pulled out, papers scattered. June was gone. Panic clawed at my chest. Had she fled? Or worse, had someone taken her? Determined, I reached out to a former journalist, Mark, who had once investigated Ashgrove Hospital. He agreed to help. Together, we uncovered cover-ups that spanned decades. Mark showed me a photo, a blurry figure entering the hospital late at night. The man's face was unmistakable, Richard. That night, I confronted Richard. His eyes didn't betray shame, only cold calculation. You think you're a hero? He sneered. You're nothing but a bitter old woman chasing ghosts. But I saw through him. He was a coward. A man who chose comfort over truth. The fight was no longer just for me or June. It was for every woman Ashgrove had crushed. And I was ready to expose them all, no matter the cost. The day I finally confronted Richard was one I will never forget. The air was thick with years of silence and betrayal. I stood in the dimly lit kitchen, the place where we had once shared so many quiet mornings. Now it was a battlefield. Why did you stay silent all these years? I demanded, voice shaking with anger. His eyes flickered with something, guilt, fear, or maybe something darker. I did what I had to do, he said coldly. You think I wanted to watch you suffer? To watch that monster ruin our lives? But you did nothing. I shouted back. You let them use me. You let them take my body, my child. And you said nothing. Richard's jaw tightened. You don't understand what I was dealing with. The power they had over me, over all of us. Power. I spat. You chose comfort over courage. You were too scared to stand up for me. He slammed his fist on the table. I protected our family the only way I knew how. By betraying me? I whispered, tears burning my eyes. For a moment, we stood in silence, two broken souls tangled in a web of regret. Then he said something that shattered me. I'm sorry you had to carry that burden alone. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession of failure. But it was also a crack in his armor. A glimpse of the man behind the mask. I realized then, Richard was as trapped as I was. But unlike me, he chose silence. And I chose to fight. The confrontation with Richard left a bitter taste, but it also ignited something in me. The fight wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about reclaiming my future. With Mark's help, June's whereabouts were finally discovered. She had been hiding in a small town, too afraid to return. When I found her, her eyes held both relief and fear. We reunited like survivors of a storm, united by pain but ready to heal. Together, we decided to hold a press conference, to finally expose Ashgrove and the people who protected it. The night before, I barely slept. Memories surged like waves, the hospital rooms, the cold looks, the silent screams. But I was ready to shatter the silence. The day arrived. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered. I looked into the crowd and saw faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical. I told our story, every brutal detail. How I was forced to carry the doctor's child while my husband stayed silent. How June lost her baby. How the system covered up the truth for decades. Questions came fast. Voices tried to drown our story. But I stood firm. After the conference, Richard's facade began to crack publicly. Whispers turned into accusations. For the first time in decades, I felt free. Not because the past was erased, but because my voice, our voices, could no longer be silenced. And Clara? She hugged me tight and said, Grandma, you're my hero. I was a grandmother who survived hell. And I was finally home. The press conference sent shockwaves through Ashgrove. For decades, the town had clung to its perfect image, but that illusion shattered overnight. The hospital launched an internal investigation, but many knew it was just a show. Cover-ups ran deep. Yet the public outcry grew louder, fueled by our stories and the evidence we presented. Richard tried to defend himself, blaming the system and claiming ignorance. But no one believed him anymore. His friends turned away. The community that once hailed him as a pillar now whispered behind his back. Meanwhile, June and I continued gathering testimonies from other women. Each story was a piece of a puzzle revealing the true horror hidden beneath Ashgrove's polished surface. Some women had found courage through us, stepping forward despite the fear. Others remained silent, their pain buried. I visited Clara more often now. She was growing strong, curious, and full of life. The opposite of the helpless child I once feared for. One afternoon, Clara asked me, "Grandma, why didn't Daddy protect you?" The question cut deeper than any wound. I looked into her eyes, searching for the right words. Sometimes people are too scared to fight, but we have to be brave, even when it's hard. That day, I promised myself I would keep fighting. Not just for me, but for the future, for Clara and every woman who deserved justice. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a lifetime, I felt hope. The dust had barely settled after the press conference, but the battle was far from over. Ashgrove was a town divided, between those clinging to old loyalties and those demanding truth. Richard's fall from grace was swift. The local council convened emergency meetings. Whispers of resignation circulated. But justice is never simple. Though public opinion turned against him, Richard still held powerful allies, men who thrived in the shadows. The hospital board tried to bury the investigation's findings, watering down reports and silencing witnesses. June and I refused to be silenced. We spent endless days and nights collecting affidavits, medical records, and sworn testimonies. Each piece was a thread weaving the tapestry of Ashgrove's dark truth. Some women came forward with stories so harrowing, I felt their pain like my own. Mothers forced to give up children taken under mysterious circumstances. Young girls threatened into silence. Families broken by lies. Among the hardest was meeting with Emily. She was barely 18 when she was admitted to Ashgrove for what was supposed to be a routine checkup. But what followed was years of torment, betrayal, and loss. Emily's story revealed a pattern. Doctors abusing power, families too afraid to speak, and a community complicit through silence. As the stories poured in, media outlets picked up the scandal. Investigative journalists dug deeper, uncovering financial fraud, illegal adoptions, and falsified medical reports. The city was forced to confront itself. Demonstrations erupted outside the hospital. Voices united, demanding accountability. Through it all, Clara stood by me. Watching her grow into a fierce young woman gave me strength. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, she asked, "Grandma, will they ever pay for what they did?" I took her hands in mine. "Some will," I said gently. "But what matters most is that their stories are heard, and we don't let history repeat itself." But justice came with a cost. Our house was vandalized. Threats escalated. Friends distanced themselves, afraid of the backlash. Richard's loyalists tried to intimidate us into silence. Still, the fight continued. We formed alliances with advocacy groups, lawyers, and survivors. Together, we began pushing for legal reforms, protections for women, transparency in hospitals, and stronger punishments for abuse. One late night, Mark called me with news. A key witness was ready to testify, someone from deep inside the hospital hierarchy. That testimony could break the case wide open. But it also meant opening old wounds for all of us. The long road to justice stretched before me, uncertain but illuminated by hope. I was no longer just a victim. I was a warrior. The day the courtroom doors opened felt like the weight of decades lifting off my chest. I sat quietly, clutching Clara's hand, her presence grounding me amid the storm. Months of preparation, endless hearings, and relentless pressure had led us here. The key witness, a former nurse named Hannah, stepped up with a trembling voice but unbreakable resolve. She recounted the horrors she'd witnessed. Forced pregnancies, patients silenced by drugs, records falsified under the doctor's orders. Every word sliced through the courtroom, exposing Ashgrove's darkest secrets. Richard's defense faltered under the weight of truth. His once proud, cold gaze cracked, revealing a man cornered by his own lies. Outside, protesters gathered, their chants echoing through the streets, a symbol that the community would no longer tolerate silence. The judge listened carefully, and one by one, the perpetrators faced consequences. Some were convicted. Others lost their licenses. Though justice could never fully erase the damage, it was a start. After the verdict, Clara hugged me tightly. "Grandma, you were so brave." I smiled through tears. In the years that followed, Ashgrove began to heal. Policies changed. Women found voices again. And I found peace in knowing I had turned my pain into power. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who suffered in silence. To every grandmother who carries wounds unseen. To every daughter who deserves a future without fear. I am Olivia Torres. I survived hell. And now, I live to tell the truth. Thank you for listening. Thank you all for listening to my story. This isn't just my journey. It's a voice for all the women who have been silenced for too long. If this story moved you, or if you want to hear more stories like mine, raw, real, and unfiltered, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We have so many stories waiting to be told. Stories of survival, truth, and courage that the world needs to hear. Don't miss out. Join our community, leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's bring light to the darkness together. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and keep fighting.